So, how do foods affect hormones? Let's talk about this. Hormones, this is going to surprise you. Hormones, like estradiol, they're made from cholesterol. Yep, that bad, evil substance, cholesterol. Your body makes it. Your liver makes it. Your other tissues make it. And they turn it into testosterone. That's testosterone there. And they will also turn it into estradiol. And if you look at those molecules, by the way, testosterone and estradiol, testosterone is the male hormone, estradiol is the female hormone. Look how similar they are. There's almost no difference. A tiny little thing in the lower left is what makes the difference between that and that. Amazing. And this is a fat cell, body fat. And if you have more body fat, you're going to have more estrogen. Here's what happens. This will not be on the test. But and one of the androgens called androstenedione gets in this fat cell, which converts it to estrone, which is a female hormone. So we're going male hormone to female hormone. And androstenedione goes to testosterone, and that's converted to estradiol. So the big point here is that if you have more body fat, the fat cells pull any male hormones in a woman's body and converts them into female hormones. Does the same for men. If you go to the beach and you look at men who've got a little extra body fat, they have breast development too. And that's not just fat. That's because their fat cells are taking their testosterone and turning it into estradiol, so they got breast development. Okay? So if you got less body fat, that's generally better from the standpoint of reducing hormone haywire. And here's another way that the body deals with it. Your liver, which always has your best interests at heart, despite the fact that we poison it regularly, your liver filters your blood, and it removes excess estrogens from the blood. So the liver's at the top there, and it pulls estrogens out, and it sends them down that little, do you see that little green tube, the bile duct? That leads into the intestinal tract. So your liver says, I think you got a little bit too much estradiol, let's get rid of it. And it sends it through the bile duct into the intestinal tract. There, it hooks onto fiber from my morning beans or rice or whatever it is, and the fiber carries it out with the waste. So, what if my lunch was chicken breast and yogurt? How much fiber is it there in those foods? They're not plants. They don't have fiber at all. So the liver still filters the blood. It still pulls the estrogen out. It goes down the bile duct into the intestinal tract, but there's no fiber to carry it away. So it goes back into the circulation, into the bloodstream, and ends up back at the liver, which says, what the heck are you doing here? I got rid of you. And it sends it back down into the intestine again. There's still no fiber because your diet hasn't changed. It goes back into the bloodstream, and it goes around 6 or 8 times a day. The answer is to bring the beans and the grains and the vegetables and fruits into the diet, and that stops the cycle and carries the estrogens away. So, by the way, same thing for testosterone. It won't remove all of it. It just removes the excesses. So a high-fiber diet will kind of take the edge off testosterone. And I live in Washington, D.C. Every morning I speculate, how would our politics change if we had a little bit more fiber in our nation's leaders' diets? Anyway, if you catch my drift. Okay, so if I got too much body fat, I'm going to have more estrogen activity. If I got more, not enough fiber, more fat, I've got too much estrogen activity, and that means all the hormone-related conditions are going to go off the scale. You with me so far? Okay, all right, so here's for extra credit. There's something called sex hormone binding globulin. That's a big name, but it's just something that binds sex hormones. It makes them inactive. And I think of it as like an aircraft carrier. If you've got a lot of mischievous fighter planes up in the air doing bad stuff, if you settle them down onto an aircraft carrier, they will do no harm. Well, if you have a lot of SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin, in your bloodstream, it's just a protein. If it's in your blood, the estrogen sticks to it, and it doesn't do anything until you really need it. So if you got more SHBG, that's good. That's against hormone haywire for you. So in our study, by the way, when we looked at SHBG in the blood, it went up in the diet phase. So that's part of why the women got better. All right, so how do foods affect estrogens? First of all, body fat's a bad actor, makes more estrogens. Fiber helps you, that eliminates estrogens, and your diet, if you work it right, can boost your SHBG, and that'll inactivate it. This happens fast. This happens within days of changing your diet. So for all those people who are worried about their various kinds of hormone-related symptoms, you don't have to wait for 6 months or a year for things to change. You can start changing things immediately. Okay, so do foods affect fertility? I mentioned the case earlier. Apparently this has been an issue for lots of folks. At the Nurses' Health Study, too, done out of Harvard University, they did what we call a case control study, where you compare people, in this case women with infertility, to those women who didn't have fertility. And what they found was, first of all, our old enemy excess fat cells were at work here. Where infertility was least, in other words, where fertility was the best, was in that little oval. That's a body mass. You're familiar with body mass index? Okay, it's your body weight, but it's adjusted for how tall you are. And I'm going to say that a healthy body weight is anything up to about 25. Between 18 and a half and 25 is the healthy range. But you see that oval is really down there around between about 19 and maybe 21. So in other words, fertility is at its peak when you're on kind of the skinny side of normal. Now, if you start gaining extra weight, you lose SHBG, you get more insulin resistance and more androgens. Those are male hormones, so fertility is lost. But you don't want to get too skinny either, because if a woman has no body fat, she'll have less estradiol, and she might have no cycle at all. So the sweet spot is sort of in the normal range, a little bit on the thin side. What could be causing all this? This morning I talked a little bit about hormones in dairy products, and let me come back to this. The milk manufacturers, some of them use bovine growth hormone. You've heard about this, where they inject the cows with bovine growth hormone, and the concern is, will traces of it get into the milk? So the dairy farmers who were not using it wanted to label their milk hormone-free. But the government said, you can't do that. Cows always make hormones. There's always hormones in milk, whether you add it or not. So the message to the consumer is, you can get milk without added bovine growth hormone, but you can't get milk without any hormones. It's always got it because it comes from a cow, most of whom are pregnant. Okay, so when you process dairy products, you take whole milk, and whole milk has fat, mostly saturated fat. It's got milk fat in it. It's also got sugar, lactose sugar. And so that's whole milk and ice cream and yogurt. Or I can also just remove the fat, have the fat alone, and that turns into butter and cheese. Or I can take the fat away, and I'm left with non-fat milk or non-fat yogurt, or what they call lactose-free milk. You've seen this, Lactaid, where the sugar is still there. They've just broken it into smaller sugars. Okay? So I want to talk about all these because they all affect fertility. As I mentioned, a cow is pregnant for about 9 months. On dairy operations, they're impregnated every year. So 3/4 of their lives, they're pregnant. And a pregnant cow makes a lot of estradiol, and a lot of it gets into the milk. Now, despite the fact that compared to the amount your body is making, it's not very much, but you're adding more than nature ever thought you would. So we think it probably does have biological effects. When milk turns into cheese, the hormones go with the fat. And so it's concentrated in cheese more than in milk. This affects not just women, but also men. Researchers at the University of Rochester went into a fertility clinic, and they said, hey guys, how much cheese are you eating? How much cheese are you eating? And they tracked everybody's cheese intake. And what they found was those men who consumed the most cheese, that's the red bar here, had the lowest sperm counts. They also had worse sperm morphology, meaning the shape of the sperm was off, and worse sperm motility, meaning their sperm were not moving normally. So what they were theorizing is that even though it's just a trace of estrogen in milk, it could be that as you concentrate it in cheese, and you take something as delicate as, say, the production of these tiny little sperms, that maybe it's enough to significantly affect male fertility. And we think that probably is the case. Okay, so that's the fatty stuff. That's the cheese and the butter. That's where the hormones are. But you remember, fat-free milk doesn't have the fat, but it has the sugar. Okay, this is lactose. That's the dairy sugar. Everybody who's lactose intolerant knows all about this because they can't digest it. If you could, you break it into galactose and glucose, and that galactose molecule on the left, that's the one that is now in the police lineup for infertility, galactose. Here's what's happening. Dan Kramer, who's a physician at Brigham and Women's Hospital and at Harvard University, did a comparison of the milk consumption in many different countries and the gradual age-related decline in fertility in these countries. It's a normal thing for a woman to have a decline in her fertility between, say, the late 20s to her late 30s to late 40s. Fertility declines. So if you look at, say, Thailand is a country that has very little milk consumption historically. And Kramer said the drop in fertility between late 20s and late 30s was about maybe 25%, something like that. And Brazil, a little bit more milk consumption and a little bit bigger drop in fertility. And then you look at the United States and you look at New Zealand, big milk-consuming countries, big drops in fertility, and you put the other countries in, you start to see what looks like a general pattern, that if you're consuming more milk and you're exposing yourself to galactose, it's toxic to the ovaries. At least that's the theory that Dan Kramer put forward and seems to be true. So if I want to look at the connections between foods and fertility, number one, body weight, bad actor. Why? Because it's changing hormones from male hormones into female hormones, going off the scale. Number two, dairy products seem to play a role. So, all right, infertility, cramps, they're bad, they're not going to kill you. Cancer can. So can foods and hormones, can they work some haywire to increase the risk of breast cancer? Estrogen is a tricky little molecule. It's a hormone. And unlike, say, insulin, which is another hormone, insulin is a huge, big Goliath of a hormone that comes along in your blood and it plants on the surface of the cell and it just stays there. Estrogen is tiny. It sneaks right through. The little pinkish, purplish dots, those are estrogen. It doesn't sit on the surface of the cell. It climbs inside. It goes all the way into the nucleus of the cell, and it can attach to your DNA. And when it's there, it can do two things. It can damage it. It can be a mutagen, causing genetic changes that can lead to cancer. And it also stimulates cell growth. So you can make abnormal cells, cancer cells, that then grow and propagate. And for decades, researchers have known that estrogen can fuel breast cancer. So there were 9 prospective studies published mostly at the end of the 1900s, looking at postmenopausal women and showing that if you look at the relationship between estradiol and cancer risk, it just hits you smack in the face. The women who have more estradiol, they have a much higher risk of developing breast cancer. Okay, very clear? The state of California has a list of things that cause cancer, like asbestos and tobacco. And estrogens are on the list of things that cause. Now, you might say, wait a minute, that's normal. I mean, those are in my blood. In the state of California, they're carcinogens. You see estradiol on there and estrone, both natural estrogens. Okay. Testosterone also, if women have too much testosterone in their blood, increases breast cancer risk. And SHBG, those are the aircraft carriers. If you have more of them, it's protective. And foods are the answer to bring all of these changes about. Okay, so if I trim body fat, that's going to help me. If you look at people with a higher body mass index, going from below 23 to between 23 and 25 and on up to, on the right, you're over a BMI of over 30, what some people would call the obese range, you see a much higher risk of developing breast cancer. What if I got breast cancer already? Same story. Researchers have looked at women who have been diagnosed with breast cancer, and then the question is, are you going to survive this cancer? And there have been a lot of studies done. When this review was done, there were 34 studies finished. 26 of them showed the more body fat you have, the higher your risk of dying of your cancer. And it's bad. If you've got a high BMI, the increased mortality is about 91% over a 5-year period. Now, you remember when I was talking about fertility? Fertility is best at sort of the low end, the skinny end of normal. That seems to be true with breast cancer survival too. And the study was done in China, and that was important because in China, the whole population tends to be thinner, at least historically, compared to Americans. So they looked at women in China diagnosed with breast cancer. They looked at their 5-year survival rate. Those with a BMI below 23 had a 5-year survival, 86.5%. Those who were just a little bit heavier, 23 to 25, had a little notch down in their survival, 83.8%. And those over 25, down to 80%. You get the idea? I mean, these changes aren't huge, but just slight increased body weight means more estrogen in the blood, more drive for those cancer cells to multiply and spread where they don't belong. So I want to tackle these estrogens, trim body fat, avoid the dairy products as well. Is this real? Could dairy really affect my hormones? There's an Australian study of postmenopausal women. Everybody rolled up their sleeve, and the researchers took a blood sample. And what they found was that the women who avoided dairy, that's the green bar, had much lower levels of estradiol compared to the women who consumed dairy. So it looks like it's real, right? Now what really counts? Do you live or do you die? This is a California study with a large group of women, all of whom had been diagnosed with breast cancer, all of whom had one thing on their mind, and that is, am I going to survive this? Or is this cancer going to come back? The green bar on the left is women who consumed habitually less than a half a serving per day of high-fat dairy products like butter or cheese. The yellow bar is those who consumed on a day-to-day basis about a half to 1 serving. The red bar is women who consumed 1 serving or more. And as you can see, the women who consumed the most high-fat dairy products had about a 49% higher risk of dying of their cancer compared to the women who generally avoided them. So we need more research on all of this, but we have more than enough evidence now to say hormone haywire is real. It comes from foods, it works fast, and now is the time to take some action. So I can trim my body fat, avoid dairy products, and I can have a low-fat, high-fiber diet, meaning a plant-based diet. Researchers have put this to the test in sort of modest ways. The Women's Health Initiative was a huge study and a very well-done study, but when I say modest, the diet that they used was, it was not a vegan diet or a vegetarian diet. It was just try to cut the fat, eat more vegetables and fruits. So they said, cut your fat intake to 20%, have more vegetables and fruits, and they brought in a group of women who had a 38% fat intake at baseline, dropped to 24%, but then kind of edged up to 29%. So the researchers thought, well, we're not accomplishing a lot here, but let's see what happens. And after 8 years, breast cancer risk did fall a little bit, 9%. I'm going to say it's not significant statistically, meaning it could have been chance, but it did look like there was a little drop. For progesterone receptor negative tumors, that's a certain kind of tumor, there was a big drop, 24%. So when this came out, many researchers said, this is terrible. We're not really having a big impact like we hoped we would. Personally, I thought it was a good study. What it shows is if you ask people to make small changes, you get small results. And if they had, my guess is if you tell a group of women, you're at risk for breast cancer, let's make some changes, I don't think you get a big fight. I think people are willing to make changes provided they get information and support along the way. A couple of other studies, just real quick. The Women's Intervention Nutrition Study asked a group of women, all of whom already had breast cancer, to make diet changes. And it was over 2,000 women, and they were all after the age of menopause, and all they asked them to do was really cut the fat down to 15% of calories, which is a pretty big drop for most women. And what they found was that their risk of having any cancer come back was down by 24%. If it was estrogen receptor negative, that was 42%. Estrogen receptor positive, 15% down. In other words, it works. You get the fat out of your diet. This was not even a plant-based diet, but a semi-plant-based diet, you see a drop. So these are women already had cancer, their survival is improved. The Women's Healthy Eating and Living Study was conducted around the same time, but they did the opposite. They said, how about this? Let's boost vegetables and fruits in your diet and see how you do. So they had more than 3,000 women, they all had breast cancer, they'd all been treated, and the goal was to keep the cancer in remission. So they had 2 different diets. The comparison diet was 5 a day, 5 vegetables and fruits. And the intervention diet, the one they're really testing, was 8 a day, vegetables and fruits plus juice. And when the results came in, they didn't really see much difference between these 2 groups. And the researchers were disappointed. They said, gee, you know, I really thought diet would make a big difference, but the 5-a-day group does about the same as the 8-a-day group. When I saw the findings, I have to say my interpretation was different. You've got a group of women with breast cancer. They read a consent form saying, we think vegetables and fruits will help you live. Some of you eat 5, some of you eat 8. And what they found is that a lot of the women in both groups ate a lot of vegetables and fruits, and there really wasn't a huge difference between the outcome. And when they looked just within the 5-a-day group at whether they lived or died over a follow-up period, part of those, one group of women ate almost 8 servings a day. They weren't supposed to because they were in the 5-a-day group. They ate 7.6 servings of vegetables and fruits a day, and they increased their physical activity. Their mortality was 4.8%. Another group did not eat their vegetables and fruits, only 3 servings a day, but they were physically active. Their mortality was over 10%. A third group did eat their vegetables and fruits, but they were complete couch potatoes, and their mortality was also over 10%. And then a final group didn't eat their vegetables and fruits, and they didn't exercise, and their mortality was worst of all, over 11%. From my standpoint, there's a lesson here. We want to do everything. Cut the fat, like the WIN study, boost the vegetables and fruits like this study, lace up our sneakers, put it all to work, because all of these things take hormone haywire and wrestle it into the ground to the extent that we possibly can. Do you ever get the question about soy products? Should I eat soy or not? Does soy cause breast cancer? Or if I have breast cancer, will it cause a problem? Let me just walk you through this. 1931, researchers discovered in soy products something called genistein. And genistein is an isoflavone that seems to have hormone-like activity. And its chemical structure is a little bit like estradiol. So many people started to think, oh, if a guy eats tofu, will he become effeminate? Will his fertility suffer? And if a woman has soy milk or soy yogurt, will this increase her risk of cancer? Or if she's got cancer, will this make the cancer more active, and could it kill her? Well, I'm happy to tell you that we've had more than enough time to investigate these questions. First of all, men who consume the most soy products do not have any issues about femininity or more infertility compared to other men. It doesn't have any adverse hormonal effects on men whatsoever. Secondly, with regard to breast cancer, 2004, there was a decisive meta-analysis where you take 8 different studies and you combine all of them together into one result. And what they showed is that those women who consume the most soy, that's soy milk, tofu, whatever, had a 29% reduced risk of breast cancer. And then they looked at women who had cancer already. This was 5 studies all put together. Those women who avoided soy had the highest mortality. That's the red bar here. Those women who consumed more soy, if they had estrogen receptor negative tumors, that's the yellow, or estrogen receptor positive tumors, that's the green. In either case, it didn't matter. Their risk of dying of their cancer was cut by a good 30%. So soy products are totally optional. You don't have to have them. A plant-based diet isn't the soybean cheerleading club. Soy products are handy. They're always better than what they replace. Soy bacon is way better for your body than pork bacon. I mean, you can turn it into anything. You can make yogurt out of it. One day they'll make snow tires out of soy, probably. But it's totally optional. You don't have to have it. There are plenty of healthy things. But it does not cause cancer, and it does not cause cancer to progress. And this is also true for prostate cancer. It's a cancer preventer to a degree. Okay, so all those oncologists out there who say, I'm sure I read in a magazine somewhere that if you've got cancer, you shouldn't have soy, it's time to get with the program. Okay, let me come back to prostate cancer a little bit. I don't know if any of you know the work of Anthony Sadalero. Tony was a doctor at Methodist Hospital in Philadelphia. And he was early 40s, busy guy. He was an anesthesiologist, but they had promoted him to become president of the hospital, and he was now running the whole operation. And one day, he had his annual physical. And so he goes down, he has the physical, and back in those days, it included a chest x-ray. And he goes back up to his office, and the phone rings. It's the radiologist who says, Tony, I want you to come on back down here. I looked at your x-ray, and I got to tell you, I don't like it. So Tony took the elevator back downstairs, and they put his chest x-ray up on the screen, and there were dense areas in his ribs, in his spine, and doctors know what this is, or they know what they fear that it could be, which is metastatic cancer. You see these little densities of, it means the cancer has spread and it's gotten into the bones and it's starting to grow. And Tony started thinking, I have had some aches and pains, but I just thought, I fell off my bike and thought maybe that's what it was. He had a bone scan the very same day, and it showed metastatic cancer all up and down his ribs, his spine, and in his skull. He then was referred to specialists who basically said, prostate cancer in an 80-year-old man is a slow-growing cancer. You might die of something else. We don't worry that much about prostate cancer in a very old man. But Tony, you're in your 40s. This is an aggressive cancer. This is coming very fast, and we can try to treat it, but they didn't lie to him. You got to get your affairs in order. And what made all this worse was that Tony's father lived in New Jersey. Tony's father had lung cancer, and he was dying, and he did die shortly after this. So Tony went up to New Jersey, and he tried to comfort his mother, but he himself was panicking, and he didn't want his mother to panic about him, but he did the best he could to support her. He got back in his car after the funeral, and he got on the New Jersey Turnpike to drive back down to Philadelphia. And back in those days, there were hitchhikers, and he stopped for two hitchhikers who were on the road. He picked them up just to have somebody to talk to. And he told them his story. He's a doctor, but now he's a patient, and he's got this deadly disease that's going to kill him. And as fate would have it, these kids had just gotten out of macrobiotic cooking school. And to them, prostate cancer was no big deal. Why don't you just change your diet, get your yin and your yang back in better balance, and you'll be okay. And Tony was totally annoyed. He thought, look, I'm a doctor. I don't need you to give me some mumbo-jumbo stuff about how your brown rice is going to save my life. This is patently ridiculous. But when he dropped him off, they managed to extract his address, promising to send him some material, and they did. A few days later, he gets a package, 67 cents postage due, and inside is a book, and it's all about cancer and hormone-related cancers, and there's a story in there from a woman who had breast cancer, and she followed this macrobiotic diet. If you're not familiar with it, macrobiotics, macro means long or big, bios, life, big life, long life. Macrobiotics is sort of ancient Chinese medical theory distilled through Japanese cuisine, so you're eating miso soup and brown rice and things like that, and they're very down on dairy and down on meat generally. Some people have fish, some don't. And there was a story of a woman who had breast cancer who cured herself with his diet. And he saw she was a physician and she lived in Philadelphia. So he called her up, and her husband answered the phone. And Tony said, how's she doing? He said, oh, she's terrible. She's dying of cancer. He says, thank you. I got it. Diet's no good. No. The husband says, no, she followed the diet. She did really well while she was on the diet. But for whatever reason, she just kind of let it go, and her cancer started coming back. The diet was really good for her. So Tony said, all right, what are my choices? There is no choice. I've got to try this and see if it works. So he realized he couldn't cook at all. So he went to the macrobiotic training center, and they taught him how to make brown rice and so forth. And he went into the hospital, the physician's dining room every day with his chopsticks and his little containers of food. And the other doctors felt sorry for this poor guy grasping at straws as he's slowly dying, except that Tony didn't die. He started feeling better. And within a month, those aches and pains were gone, and his energy was improving, and he just kind of felt okay. And 6 months, he was supposed to be dead. 6 months, he was doing fine. And at a year, he was doing fine, and he said, I got to know. Let's repeat the bone scan. And they did. And the cancer was not detectable anymore. You couldn't see it. And so he thought, all right. And so he wrote this book called Recalled by Life, to say, I don't know exactly what's happening, but something is happening to a hormone-related cancer that really is powerful, and it all comes from a diet change. So I was really interested in this. I read his book, and if you go on Amazon, you'll find this used. It's a really good, quick read. And so I called him up, and he said, yeah, come on over. And so I did, and I went to his house, And he pulled out his scans, and one of these scans is like your worst nightmare, and the other is completely healthy. It was amazing. And we were talking all about food and everything. And he said, but, you know, I got to tell you, I'm trying an experiment. I want to see if I loosen up my diet, like, will I still be okay? I want to tell you, this made me, like, really nervous. He said, I've been adding back fish, and I've been adding back some chicken and things. And he said, but he's not feeling quite so well. He's feeling kind of some swelling and stuff. But after a while, he stopped the experiment. I called him on the phone about 2 weeks later, and his voice was completely changed. He was like slurring his speech like a person who was drugged. I said, Tony, what is it? He said, I'm on medication. And I knew exactly what he meant. He was on narcotic painkillers. My cancer's back. And within about another 2 weeks, he was dead. Now, you cannot know if foods caused his cancer in the first place. And you can't really be sure that did the diet change make the cancer go away, and had he still been on a healthy diet, would he be alive today? I don't know. But we know enough theoretically and from the medical research that we've done to know that there are ways that foods do change hormones, and hormone-related cancers are target number one because they are huge killers where the treatments that we have are often really tough, and the food choices appear to be decisive. So this morning I talked a bit about milk and hormones. When you consume milk, it increases insulin-like growth factor in the blood, IGF-1. That's a stimulus for cancer cell growth, and it reduces vitamin D in the blood. Vitamin D is a cancer preventer. I'm just going to walk you through this really quick. Insulin-like growth factor is a factor in your body that causes growth. And when you're a little kid, it's normal to have a lot of it. But when you are fully grown, nature says, hey, like, slack off on the growth now. If you have too much of it, cancer cells grow. Researchers in Nebraska fed a group of men and women milk, 3 glasses of milk a day, and their IGF-1 levels went up about 10%. And they thought, isn't that great? No, that's not great. That makes you at a higher risk of getting cancer. Regarding vitamin D, I mentioned that milk suppresses vitamin D. This is confusing, but let me just walk you through it real quick. Vitamin D is made from sun on your skin. And one of its jobs is to help your body to absorb calcium. Another job is to reduce cancer risk. So sunlight on the skin makes vitamin D, and then the vitamin D goes to your liver, which activates it, and it goes to the kidneys, and then activates it some more, and then it goes to your intestinal tract to help you absorb calcium, and it goes down to the prostate to protect you against cancer. But if I decide, I think today I'd like to have a glass of milk and some cheese, the body discovers that you're having all this calcium, too much calcium. You don't need so much vitamin D to absorb it because you're getting huge amounts anyway, so it blocks the activation. It shuts down the activation of vitamin D. So it's trying to protect you from too much calcium, but in the process, you lose your cancer protection. At Dean Ornish, you know Dean Ornish's work, medical genius. He showed that you can reverse heart disease. It became clear that he needed to do a study on the same kind of plant-based diet for prostate cancer. He brought in 84 men. They all had slow-growing prostate cancer, and a control group that was following just their regular diet had it rise in their PSA. That's prostate-specific antigen. It's a blood test that just shows what's happening to the prostate cancer. It rose 6%. That's bad. You don't want your PSA to be rising. He had an experimental group following a vegan diet, and their PSA didn't rise at all. It fell on average by 4%. And in the control group, 6 of the participants had to drop out of the study because their cancer was progressing and they needed surgery or radiation. In the vegan group, nobody did, at least during the 1 year of the study. Now, I'm not saying that this will replace all cancer treatment. What I'm saying is this is where we start. Whatever treatment you're going to have breakfast, you're going to have lunch, you're going to have dinner, and we want to have something that will control the hormones. So, hormone haywire, whether it's cramps or infertility or breast cancer or prostate cancer or all the goofy things that can happen to us, that's something that we don't have to be a victim of. We can change it. A low-fat, plant-based diet will help us to reduce body fat. It'll obviously avoid those nasty dairy hormones. It provides lots of fiber, very little fat, and if I want to have soy products, I can do that too. So I hope you found this useful, and I hope you'll share it with other people. Thank you very much.
Hello. Hello, hello. Oh, that is wonderful, Dr. Barnard. We do have a few questions, and while I find them on my messy table, I was wondering if you just speak for a minute. I ran into an actual MD in the restroom, and I know that you have certain things for clinicians, don't you? I mean, you have things for lay people, too, like your Kickstart, but since there are some clinicians in the audience, maybe you could say what PCRM offers for them.
Oh, thank you, AJ. Thanks for letting me mention this. Yes, we have, the first thing is we have something called the Nutrition Guide for Clinicians. It's both online, downloadable, and in print, and it's online for free, whether you're a clinician or not. So it's called the Nutrition Guide for Clinicians, and it's updated continuously. It started out because we realized that doctors weren't learning much about nutrition in school, so we printed it up and gave the books away free to every medical student in the United States. We've been doing that for years, and now it's print and handheld version. We also have continuing medical education, or CME, and it's online at nutritioncme.org, and it's also free. There's hours and hours and hours of continuing medical education credits you can get. And we also have a conference like this one in Washington, D.C., but it's all doctors and medical students. We just had it about 2 weeks ago and had about 1,000 doctors there. In fact, by the way, Dean Ornish was our first speaker, and we had to welcome him back because when he was in Washington much more before, he had convinced Bill Clinton to change his diet to a vegan diet, and then Al Gore did the same, and there's a current resident of the White House who I think would benefit from the same changes, perhaps. A little asparagus wouldn't hurt anybody. So anyway, those are some of the things that we do, and our website, pcrm.org, also has a Kickstart program that clinicians can refer their patients to. So let's say you have a patient who could benefit from this but is nervous. They just join the Kickstart, which is free, and every day they get menus and recipes and cooking videos and so forth to help them, and it's in English, Spanish, Mandarin. We have a program in English but for people from India with Indian recipes, and a Japanese program. It's all free. There's no commercial sponsorship. It's 600,000 people have used it already, and dig in, have fun with it. So anyway, thank you for letting me mention all those resources.
No. Thank you for what you're doing for the clinicians. Yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
Thank
you
you.
guys. So we have two questions about is it ever okay to eat meat. So let me just read them both because I think they're sort of similar in a way. One is if you have eaten vegan, no sugar, oil, salt, no sugar, salt, oil, flour, alcohol, and are fit and have maintained optimal weight for over a year, can you eat some high-quality fish or meat once a week? And then another question is, has man evolved such that some animal products are helpful? We've been eating meat for 5,000 to 10,000 years, so curiosity makes me wonder, do we now need some meat for health?
Okay, well, those are great questions. Well, the short answer is you don't need meat at all, and all the studies show that when a person follows a plant-based diet, they do better in just about every domain. And when I say a healthy plant-based diet, I mean vegetables, fruits, whole grains, beans. You do need to supplement vitamin B12, which we could talk about if you want to. And if you have the bad judgment to live in a place like I grew up, North Dakota, you might need to supplement vitamin D because you aren't ever getting any sun, ever. But that's kind of it. And no, there's no need for meat at all. There's a couple of concerns that I have, though. If a person says, I've been doing this a long time and I feel pretty well, why don't I have a little meat once in a while? What you discover is often if a person had that desire, it makes you wonder if there was something a little addictive in the back of their mind making that comment to them. Because if you're doing really well and you like the foods and you're healthy, you wouldn't really think about reintroducing that. So the problem then is you give in. You say, I'm just going to do this once. But then about a week later, you think, that went all right. I think I'll do it again. And it becomes more and more and more and more. And so that's one of the biggest dangers of having a little bit of meat is that, and it's the same with anything. It's the same with alcohol or whatever your issue was. If you allow a problematic substance back in your life, it tends to take over. Now, that said, I do have one way that you can prepare meat where it actually will not hurt you at all. And let me just describe that. If you take a small amount of, let's say it's salmon or some kind of fish, and you cook it well because you don't want it to be raw, and you cut it into rather small bite-sized pieces, you put it on a little plate, like a little saucer. Then you put it on the floor and you call your cat over to eat it, and your cat will have no health problems as a result because your cat is a carnivore. However, you are a great ape and you are an herbivore, so I wouldn't actually eat it yourself.
Thank you. You know, I forgot to mention this to the group and to you, Dr. Barnard. Today is September 1st, and 41 years ago today was the day that I became vegan.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm really proud. And one of the, I'm just going to ask you this because you would answer it probably compassionately, because one of the stupidest questions I get is like, well, if everybody was vegan, there'd be too many animals.
Okay. Yes. What obviously would happen is animals don't live very long. A chicken that you see in the store wrapped in plastic, that chicken is 6 weeks old. So it's not like there's going to be a whole bunch of chickens coming to your house. When people reduce the amount of animals they eat, the supply will fall. I mentioned this morning, dairy cows are killed by about 4, and that's the low-grade meat that gets turned into hamburger. So the turnover is so fast that the supply would dry up very quickly. And let me say, for anybody who's thinking about this, it isn't just health. What we are doing to the earth is amazing. When I go back to Fargo, where I grew up, and I drive down the highway, it's the most beautiful sight in the world. Corn as far as the eye can see. Each plant bright green and absolutely identical to the plant next to it. It's genetically engineered crops. And no human is going to eat it. It's all for pigs and for hogs, pigs and cows and chickens. And on this side of the highway, it's all soybeans. Beautiful, as far as the eye can see, genetically identical, all for animal feed. And it's all fertilized, so it will grow, and it's all irrigated, and the irrigation water pulls the fertilizer into the streams, and you're now fertilizing the rivers, and as eventually it drains into the Mississippi, and you have this big overgrowth of algae which eventually dies, and you're killing the life in the waterways. And finally, the Mississippi is flushed out at Louisiana and Texas, and if you look down there, there is an 8,000 square mile dead zone as a result of the fertilizer and irrigation that we've been doing in North Dakota and Nebraska and Kansas and everywhere, all for feeding animals. If people decided tomorrow, I'm just going to eat plants directly, the amount of acreage you need is minuscule. The amount of fertilizer you need is minuscule compared to this. If you put all the cows in North America on one side of a balance and all the people on the other side of the balance, the cows outweigh us. Each one is as big as a sofa, and they are belching methane all day long. And climate change is real. I think it's been some years since anybody really credibly tried to deny it. It's obvious. It's getting worse, and that means temperatures are going up and the variability is getting crazier. You'll see more unpredictable weather patterns here and abroad. That's what we are experiencing now. I don't know if it's too late to stop it. But while we're waiting for coal plants to cap themselves, all this kind of stuff, good heavens, your lunch is the most decisive thing. So it's not just us. And then from the standpoint of animals, I grew up in a cattle ranching family. I shot animals when it was hunting season. But there comes a time where you have to grow up and restrain your impulses and realize that killing 1 million animals every hour, as we do in the United States, just for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, that there are ethical issues there too. And the beauty of it is when we learn to restrain nasty impulses, whether they're from men toward women, one race toward another, or one species toward another, everybody benefits in that change. So there's every reason to make this change.
Thank you, Dr. Barnard. One more quick question, or actually two, which combine. It's on point about Hormone Haywire. It's about, somebody is saying they've been whole food plant-based, no SOS for 3 years, but hot flashes are coming back. They want to know why, and how do you feel about bioidentical hormones? And also, do you think the fact that I've never had a hot flash, and my sister either, do you think because, we've been vegan so long that it just doesn't affect us?
Yes, fascinating question, and I don't think we know the final answer on this. But here's what we are speculating is happening, is that let's say you're on a meat-based diet with not much fiber, then you've got a little bit too much estrogen in your blood, and although it cycles, the average amount is a little bit too high. Then at menopause, what happens is the ovaries stop making estradiol, and the amount comes crashing down, and you're basically getting withdrawal symptoms. At least that's the way we characterize it. And that will last a long time. It'll be very unpredictable, and it can last for years. Now, I think it can happen even for people who are on healthy diets, probably. But in Japan, women have followed low-fat, mostly plant-based diets for a long period of time, and about 15% of Japanese women will report hot flashes. In the United States, maybe 80%, something like that. And so what we are hypothesizing is that if a person was on not just a plant-based diet, but a really healthy plant-based diet, high fiber, low fat, that we probably would have our hormones in better balance all along so that the change at menopause would not be so severe. I don't know that that's the case, but that's kind of where we're leaning.
That is terrific. Dr. Barnard, thank you so much.
Well, before we go, just one thing. I want to say this. You know, in any given day, a doctor might treat 15 or 20 patients, and you hope you have an impact on their life. But I want to say that when Chef AJ pulls all this together, and all of you come, and you reach lots and lots and lots of people, and you blog, and we share the information that we have together, you'll never know who all are the people that you inspire and who you intrigue, and maybe even people who fight with you a little bit now you'll plant seeds. The effect of this is huge. It's enormous. So I want to say a big thank you to you, AJ, and to the whole team that's pulled this together, and to all of you who are doing this work together. It's a wonderful partnership, and I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well,